The lobby felt heavier than the air conditioning could manage. Shoes clicked against marble, a steady rhythm, until hers entered the space, measured, deliberate. Heads shifted, but only briefly. No one wanted to be caught looking too long. Still, the silence wasn't empty. It held the weight of practiced indifference, the kind that cut deeper than words. The manager's voice sliced the stillness. "Ma'am, may I help you?" His tone carried the thin politeness of someone who already believed the answer was no. She met his gaze, steady. "Yes, I'm here to make a transfer." He hesitated, scanning her outfit, her skin, her composure. "Do you have an account here?" Her lips pressed into the faintest smile. "I do." She placed the papers on the counter, hands steady, while his fingers twitched against the desk. Around them, customers shuffled, pretending to scroll on their phones, but the tension was unavoidable. A guard near the door shifted his weight. Teller glanced up, then quickly down. Everyone saw, but no one spoke. The manager flipped through the documents too slowly, as though searching for a flaw. "This is a large amount. Are you sure you understand the process?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Do you?" The words landed sharp. A woman in line coughed, covering what might have been a laugh, or maybe disbelief. The manager stiffened, cheeks flushing beneath his controlled smile. Narration cut through the silence. It wasn't her voice that unsettled the room. It was her certainty. She wasn't asking to be allowed in. She was reminding them she already belonged here. The moment lingered. The lobby, once a place of routine transactions, felt like a stage, and every second of silence was an unspoken testimony. The teller's pen clicked twice before he slid the portfolio toward the manager. She kept her hands folded, steady, as if refusing to let the weight of the room rattle her. "Ma'am," the manager began, his voice stretched thin with courtesy. "These figures seem unusual. You're sure this belongs to you?" Her gaze didn't move. "Yes. Every document is in order. You can verify the signatures." He smirked, pressing a finger against the first page as though he might leave a permanent mark. "We see a lot of mistakes in cases like this. People get confused. Maybe you misunderstood the requirements." Silence lingered. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. The restraint was deliberate. "I didn't misunderstand," she said quietly. "You're holding the proof." The lobby seemed to tighten. Around them, a man waiting nearby shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to listen while his eyes lingered on the scene. The manager leaned back. "Policy requires me to question unusual requests, especially when the amounts are significant." His pause was heavy, calculated. Fraud is common these days. Her eyes flickered, not with anger, but with the sting of recognition. She had heard that word before, wielded like a weapon. "Look at the account history," she replied. "It tells you more than my face ever could." For the first time, his smile faltered. He flipped the papers with too much force, as though the sound of pages turning could cover his discomfort. "I'll need to make some calls," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. She exhaled softly, the kind of breath that carried years of patience. Around them, the silence wasn't ignorance anymore. It was awareness, creeping into every corner of the bank. Her fingers stayed on the edge of the counter, steady, though the weight of the room pressed hard against her chest. A cough broke from somewhere in line. Someone whispered too loudly, "Figures!" The sound clipped the air like a blade. She lifted her chin, not to fight but to breathe. "Is there a problem with my documents?" Her voice was calm, even softer than before. The manager leaned back, letting the murmurs thicken the moment. "I'm just verifying. You understand, don't you?" His smile wasn't an answer. It was a performance, one meant for the watching eyes. Behind her, a man muttered, Always trying to game the system. Another voice hushed him, not out of kindness but discomfort. The room wasn't siding with her. It was retreating, letting silence speak in its cowardice. She turned slightly, her eyes scanning the faces. Some looked away quickly, others pretended to study their phones. No one dared to meet her gaze for long. The message was clear. She stood alone. The manager tapped the folder again, louder this time, like a gavel. These numbers. Unusual for someone in your position. He didn't finish the sentence, but the pause said enough. Her lips parted, a breath escaping before words. My position? The question wasn't sharp, only tired. For the first time, the smirk faltered. He adjusted his tie, realizing the room now waited for his response. But the whispers continued, filling the space he couldn't. She didn't push further. Her silence spoke louder, turning judgment back toward the crowd. And in that silence, his confidence cracked. Just slightly, but enough for those watching to feel the shift. The room grew still, the murmurs thinning, as if even complicity had grown uneasy. The manager's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "This is fraud," he declared, his tone louder than necessary. "You don't belong here. Security, step closer." A few heads turned, relief washing over some faces as though they'd been waiting for him to say it. Others sank deeper into silence, unwilling to be caught on either side. Her hands rested calmly on the counter, though her chest tightened. "Fraud?" she asked softly, her words barely breaking the air. The manager smirked. "You hand me documents that don't add up, demand access you don't deserve and call it banking? That's not confidence, that's deception." Security shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other before looking back at her. Their hesitation betrayed the weight of his words against the calm of her stance. "Everything I gave you is real," she replied, her voice steady, though her throat burned. "You didn't even check before deciding who I must be." He leaned forward, puffing his chest. "Policy doesn't bend because someone gets offended. Protocol exists for a reason, and I decide when it's broken." A silence stretched, pressing, heavy on the room. One of the customers whispered, "She's got papers. I saw them." It was quickly hushed by a hand on the arm. Her eyes didn't leave him. "You're not following protocol," she said, the calm in her voice cutting sharper than anger ever could. "You're hiding behind it." For the first time, his words caught in his throat. His lips parted as if to respond, but only air filled the pause. His authority, once loud, suddenly wavered under her quiet restraint. The room felt different. Now, still tense, but edged with the faint crack of his unraveling mask. His laughter came sharp, meant to dismiss, but it cracked faintly at the edges. "Regret? Lady, the only regret here will be yours. Security is already on its way." Her eyes didn't leave his. "I've been through worse than your threats," she said, voice even, carrying more weight in its restraint than any outburst could. Around them, silence spread, employees pretending to shuffle papers while stealing glances. "Don't play victim," he snapped, leaning closer. "Policy is policy. Fraud won't pass through me." "You hide behind words like that?" she whispered, the calmness cutting deeper than accusation. "But one day you'll wish you'd listened instead of humiliated." For a moment his jaw clenched, as if the balance of power had shifted without warning. He straightened, adjusting his tie, covering his unease with practiced arrogance. "Empty threats don't work here. This is a bank, not your stage." She didn't blink. "And yet somehow all eyes are on us." That line settled like a stone. A clerk froze mid-typing, another looked down quickly, and even the guard by the door hesitated. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. The manager smirked weakly, though his hand twitched on the desk. "You think anyone cares?" "I don't think," she answered quietly. "I know." The certainty in her tone hollowed his defiance. He turned his back too quickly, reaching for a phone that didn't need to be touched yet, his movements betraying the unraveling. And still, she stood unmoved, her silence louder than his orders. It wasn't a threat she left him with, but a sentence, sharper than any chain, heavier than the accusations he threw. The room shifted, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he held control. ChatGPT said the sirens cut off sharply, replaced by the heavy thud of boots on marble. The officers fanned out, hands hovering near their belts, their eyes scanning. The crowd shrank back, whispering. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her leather portfolio, slow and deliberate, as though she were simply continuing business. The manager's voice cracked as he pointed. "That's her. That's the woman. Take her." Her hand paused mid-air. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Careful what you touch." The words were not threat, but warning, calm enough to ripple through the air. The nearest officer hesitated, uncertain. His gaze flicked to her face, then to the document she laid across the counter. "This is harassment," she said, steady, "and you'll want to read before you act." One officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we were told..." "Told what?" Her eyes didn't leave his. "That I'm a criminal? Or that I'm inconvenient?" Silence pressed down. Even the clicking pens at the desks had stilled. The manager shifted uneasily, his bravado thinning. She unfolded a letter with deliberate care. The embossed seal caught the fluorescent lights. "I came here prepared," she murmured, sliding the page forward. The officer leaned, frowning as he read. His expression tightened, then softened with recognition. He passed it to his partner, who stiffened mid-breath. "Is there a problem?" she asked quietly. The manager snapped, desperate. "Don't be fooled! She's..." But the officer cut him short, his voice firmer now. "Sir, I suggest you step back." A ripple went through the lobby. Something had shifted. The woman stood motionless, dignity wrapping her like armor. The room, once loud with accusation, now held its breath. The carpet still smelled faintly of polish, but beneath that shine lived stories no one dared voice. Silence weighed heavy, carrying the echoes of what had always been brushed aside. "Do you remember Marcus?" one of the tellers whispered, her voice trembling. "The janitor. They called the police on him for stealing office supplies. Nothing was missing." The older clerk, staring into her ledger, nodded slowly. "He never came back. 30 years of service, gone overnight. They said it was policy. We knew it wasn't." A customer overheard, his voice low, almost ashamed. "My brother tried for a loan here, had the papers, the income, everything, but they told him funds had run out. Next week, a white man from his office got approved with half his credit." The room stiffened. Truth, once spoken, refused to fade. The manager shifted uneasily, his collar suddenly too tight. "You don't understand. Those were isolated cases. Misunderstandings." But the teller's eyes hardened. "Misunderstandings don't repeat themselves like clockwork." Narration pressed through the silence. The bank had mastered the art of erasure. Each wrong was folded neatly, filed away, as though dignity was paper to be shredded. A guard near the door cleared his throat, breaking the tension, but not the truth. "I've seen it. Preferred clients, they call them. Always the same faces, always the same skin." The woman at the center of it all stood still, letting the words unravel what she didn't need to say. Their confessions did it for her, and in that moment the polished glass no longer looked pure. It reflected a truth long buried, one that no one in the room could unsee anymore. The manager leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen like he owned the air around him. His smirk carried weight, the kind that had gone unchallenged for years. "You people," he muttered, not even looking up. "Always think you're owed something." Her voice didn't rise. "I asked for the same respect you give anyone else. That's all." He laughed under his breath, sharp and dismissive. "Respect is earned." Silence hung heavy. She stared at him, not with anger, but with the stillness of someone who had seen this dance before. Narration filled the pause. His power wasn't in policy, but in the comfort of never being questioned. His crown wasn't gold, it was arrogance polished by years of unchecked authority. "You think because you're sitting in that chair, you get to decide who belongs?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward, voice clipped. "I do decide. This is my branch, my rules." The arrogance slipped through his words like oil. He believed it. Every syllable confirmed it. But her calm didn't break. "Then maybe it's not the rules you're protecting. Maybe it's yourself." For the first time, his smirk faltered. His pen stopped tapping. A flicker of unease crossed his face, so brief it might have been imagined. The ground shifted just slightly. Around them, the quiet of the bank seemed sharper. A teller glanced over, sensing something different. Though no one dared speak, she didn't need to press further. Her silence filled the room louder than his authority ever had. He leaned back again, slower this time, but the armor no longer looked unbreakable. His crown of arrogance sat heavy, tilting under the weight of its own cracks. His voice still lingered in the air, sharp with authority, when she finally adjusted the folder in her hands. No tremor, no rush. Just a quiet movement that made people glance twice. The manager, leaning back with false ease, frowned. "You heard me," he said, slower now, as if repetition would break her. Her eyes met his. "Yes," she answered simply, tone flat, almost steady. Silence followed. Not submission, not defiance, just something he couldn't place. A young teller, shifting nervously behind the counter, leaned toward a colleague. His whisper slipped out, unguarded. "She's not like the others." The words hung heavier than he intended. Heads turned. The manager stiffened, catching the shift he could no longer control. The woman set her portfolio on the desk, neatly, firmly. "These are not papers," she said softly. "They are years." Her calm voice unsettled the room. The junior employee bit his lip, realizing the truth in her tone. For the first time, authority bent, not by force, but by stillness. The manager tapped his pen, louder than needed. "Ma'am, rules are rules." She didn't flinch. "Then let them apply to all." The teller dropped his gaze, shame written across his face. Even the hum of the ceiling light felt louder now. The manager's jaw tightened. He wanted her to shout, to lose composure, to fit the story he had rehearsed countless times. But she gave him nothing. Her silence was not emptiness. It was weight. It pressed into the room, turning every stare against him. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how hollow his crown of arrogance felt when confronted by someone who didn't bow. And in that moment, his certainty began to crack. The murmurs spread like a draft across the marble floor. At first, they were low, a shuffle of voices trying not to be heard. But in the stillness of that lobby, every word carried. A reporter, notebook pressed against his chest, leaned toward another. "If this goes the same way as the others, it'll vanish by morning." His tone wasn't cynical. It was tired. Behind them, a woman older than the rest clutched her handbag. Her eyes, heavy with years of silence, shifted toward the black woman still standing calm. "We never stood a chance," she muttered, her voice cracking like glass. The manager caught the words. His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The weight of the whispers was louder than any protest. "She's different," another reporter whispered, almost as if defending her. "Look at her. She hasn't said a thing, and the whole room's shaken." The woman glanced briefly at them, her silence answering questions no one dared to ask. The old victim lowered her gaze. "We tried fighting once. They buried us in papers and lies." "Not this time," the reporter murmured back, eyes fixed on the woman's calm stance. "Not if someone writes it right." The manager shifted in his chair, his authority thinning in the atmosphere. His voice, forced low, broke the silence. "Enough gossip. This isn't a circus." But no one stopped. The whispers carried on. Not loud, not confrontational, just steady. Truth spoken in fragments cutting through the polished air. For the first time, he realized he couldn't silence them all. The woman adjusted her folder against her chest. No words, no gestures, just a quiet presence that made every whisper feel like testimony, every silence like judgment. The officer flipped the folder open, his voice faltering. This isn't what we thought." His partner leaned closer, the color draining from his face. Pages marked with seals, signatures, and government crests stared back at them. Not bank slips, not fake checks. Classified contracts, official approvals. The manager's jaw clenched. "What are you looking at? Just finish the—" The officer cut him off, quiet but sharp. "Sir, you might want to stop talking." The room stiffened. Reporters craned forward, their whispers dying mid-air. The woman stood still, her hands folded, watching them unravel. She hadn't raised her voice once. "Federal authorization," the second officer murmured, almost to himself. "Direct clearance from higher agencies. She's not the suspect here." The crowd gasped. Someone muttered, "You've got to be kidding." The manager staggered back. No, that's not possible. She came in here shouting, demanding." His words cracked like glass under weight. Her eyes met his, calm, unflinching. "What I carried was never a threat. It was my work, my name, stamped where you never imagined it could be." The BAB officers exchanged a look, then straightened, their entire posture shifting. Respect replaced suspicion. "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "we owe you an apology." She didn't move. Silence filled her pause, pressing harder than any accusation. In the corner, someone whispered, "She outranks all of them." The balance had flipped, not with force, not with noise, but with the quiet weight of truth made undeniable. The manager swallowed, his words trapped. The folder lay open on the table, a mirror of his collapse and her rising ground. And in that stillness, everyone knew the room no longer belonged to him. The silence felt unbreakable, until the sharp sound of boots shifted against the marble floor. One officer stepped forward, shoulders squared. His voice came low but steady. "Ma'am." He lifted his hand in salute. The air trembled. Another officer followed, then another, the line stiffening into respect that cut deeper than words. Their hands rose as one. The room, moments ago drowning in suspicion, bent under the weight of sudden reverence. The manager blinked rapidly, his smirk twitching into something broken. What are you doing?" His voice cracked, thin and trembling. The lead officer's eyes stayed on her. "Showing respect," he said simply. Her chest tightened. She hadn't spoken, not once since the file was opened. She didn't need to. The folder had spoken for her, and now the silence carried her voice. The manager's face drained, his hand fumbling against the counter. This doesn't make sense. She was lying. She was... No. An officer cut him off, his salute unbroken. "You were wrong." The manager tried to laugh, but it fell flat, hollow. "You don't salute criminals." "We don't," the officer replied, turning his eyes toward him at last. "That's why we're saluting her." Whispers spread through the bystanders. The weight of the moment pressed on everyone. The authority the manager once wore like armor now cracked in plain sight. His words shrank, his posture slumped. She finally breathed, steady, almost gentle. "You didn't see me. You saw what you wanted." The manager's lips parted, but no words came. The officers held their salute a moment longer, and in that quiet gesture his arrogance shattered completely. When their hands lowered, the room no longer belonged to him. It never would again. The clicking of cameras filled the chamber, each flash carving deeper lines of unease across the manager's face. His tie sat crooked, his palms trembled against the wood as he leaned toward the microphone. I was simply following protocol," he muttered, his voice thin, breaking under. "Its own weight," a reporter's voice cut through, sharp. "Protocol? Or prejudice?" His lips parted, then closed. Silence lingered. He shifted in his chair, sweat gathering at his brow. The once confident smirk was gone, replaced with a hunted stare. Across from him she sat motionless, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She did not rise, did not interrupt. Her presence alone seemed louder than any rebuttal. Each second she remained silent, pressed heavier on him, the truth hanging in the air without her needing to speak it. A councilwoman leaned forward. "Do you have any evidence? Any proof for the call you made?" His throat bobbed. I thought she was suspicious." The words spilled out clumsily, thinner than paper, unable to stand. The audience murmured, their whispers spreading like wildfire. Still she stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on him, steady, unshaken. That silence was unbearable. It forced the room to hear what he could never admit out loud. One journalist whispered, "She doesn't even need to say a word." "Look at him!" The manager's hands clutched the edges of the table, his knuckles white, his breath shallow. His authority had drained, leaving only a man shrinking under the weight of his own arrogance. She lowered her gaze slightly, a small act of composure that felt louder than any outburst. And in that restrained silence, the balance of power shifted forever. The flash of cameras still burned in the manager's eyes. His collar tugged tighter with every question hurled his way. I only followed what was required," he muttered, trying to find safety in the word protocol. His voice trembled, never landing steady. A reporter shot back. "Required by whom? By the law? Or by your prejudice?" Murmurs rippled across the room, sharp and unforgiving. His lips moved, but nothing coherent left them. It's just policy. Security concerns. You know how it is." His words tangled, thin as thread. He adjusted his tie, avoiding her gaze like it carried fire. She had stayed silent until then, still as stone, calm. Her folded hands rested on the table like an anchor, as if the storm belonged only to him. The weight of the hall shifted when she finally lifted her head, her eyes fixed on him. No anger, no rush, just truth, steady and clean. "Your protocol was humiliation," she said, each syllable deliberate. Then, after a pause that stretched like a blade, "Mine is justice." The air froze. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the scribbling pens stopped. The manager swallowed hard, his jaw clenching but failing to hold form. A bead of sweat traced down his cheek, catching the light as it fell. For the first time, he seemed smaller, his chair swallowing him whole. Reporters leaned forward, the silence feeding their questions more than words could. They didn't need her to say anything else. The sentence lingered, heavier than paragraphs of defense. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second the arrogance slipped. What stared back at him was not a woman wronged, but dignity unshaken. And in that silence, his throne cracked. The applause did not come all at once. It started with a single clap, hesitant, almost unsure. Then another, then a wave that filled the entire hall. Reporters, customers, even the officers who had once stood rigid by the door joined in. She did not smile, did not bow. She only walked, steady and composed, as though the sound itself was not for her, but for the truth finally spoken aloud. The manager's eyes darted around the room, searching for an anchor. None came. His voice, once loud and commanding, was swallowed by silence. He muttered, This is not... I was only following... But his words drowned beneath the rising applause. His own staff avoided his gaze, their faces marked with shame. "Protocol," she whispered under her breath, not for him but for herself, a reminder of the chains he tried to wrap around her. Then louder, clear enough for those nearest to hear. "Some chains break themselves." The officers shifted uneasily. One of them nodded in her direction, almost a salute, before stepping aside. The crowd's clapping grew sharper, turning into a rhythm that pressed on the manager like a weight. He lowered his head, his hands trembling against the counter that once gave him authority. She paused at the door. The cameras blinded, the flashes, cracked like lightning, yet she did not flinch. Her silence was her triumph, her dignity her weapon. Behind her the applause did not stop. It rose higher, a sound that buried his arrogance deeper than any reprimand could. For a moment he looked smaller, almost fragile. Not the figure who had called for her arrest minutes ago, but a man undone by the simple refusal of a woman to bow. The applause still rang faintly in his ears as he pushed the office door open. For the first time, the silence inside wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. His desk, once buried under papers, awards, and neatly stacked files, stood empty. The nameplate was gone. Even the framed photo of him shaking hands with a senator had been pulled from the wall. He froze, staring at the void like it might explain itself. A knock on the door frame broke the stillness. One of his assistants lingered, eyes lowered. "Your calls aren't being transferred anymore," she said quietly. "Headquarters. They don't want your name attached to anything." He tried to straighten his shoulders, but the weight pressed, down harder. "And the others?" Her pause was answer enough. Finally, she whispered, "People don't want to be seen with you." Then she walked away without waiting for a reply. He sank into the chair, the leather creaking under him, and reached for the phone. No dial tone, just silence. His hand shook as he set it down. Later that evening, walking home, he noticed neighbors on the street turning their heads. A woman pulled her child closer. A man who once waved every morning crossed before their eyes, met. Shame followed him like a shadow he couldn't shake. At dinner, his daughter barely touched her food. When he asked how school was, she looked at him once, then back at her plate. Her silence cut sharper than any headline. He realized then, applause had buried his arrogance, but emptiness was burying what little remained of him. For the first time, the man who built walls of pride around himself sat in the ruins, and no one reached out a hand. The headlines spread faster than she expected. Everywhere she turned, whispers trailed her, soft enough not to intrude, but heavy enough to feel. At the bank's entrance, the same teller who once waved her aside stood stiff, holding the door open. His hand trembled. You don't have to," she murmured, pausing at the threshold. "I do," he replied quietly, lowering his eyes. "I should have done it before." Inside, silence lingered longer than usual. Chairs creaked, papers shuffled, but eyes lifted with a different weight now. Not pity, not fear. Respect. An older woman in line leaned closer. "You made us proud," she whispered. Her voice cracked as if carrying years of silence. She smiled faintly, not out of pride but relief. "All I did was stand. And that's more than most of us dared," the woman answered. The manager's office door, once a symbol of authority, now remained shut, blinds drawn. Employees exchanged brief looks, none daring to mention his name. She walked toward the counter, each step, measured, her dignity untouched. A young clerk shifted nervously, then whispered, "Ma'am, it's an honor." Her breath caught, not from their words, but from how the air had changed. Once suffocating, now open. Yet deep inside, she knew respect wasn't about headlines or doors held open. It was about reclaiming the space that was always hers. She signed her documents calmly, slid the papers back, and turned to leave. The room stayed hushed, as though waiting for her to speak. She didn't. She only nodded, letting silence carry what words could never hold. And with each step outside, she felt the weight of injustice lift, not erased, but finally acknowledged. The echo of doors opening for her still followed when she stopped in front of the school gates. Students lingered, their whispers clinging to the air. One voice broke through, fragile yet deliberate. "Ma'am," a young girl said, clutching her books tightly. Her voice trembled, almost afraid of being heard. "Because of you. I won't stay quiet anymore." The woman turned slowly. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, silence carried more weight than any reply. The girl swallowed hard. "They laugh at me in class, about my skin, about everything. I used to just pretend not to hear." Her words cracked, spilling years of swallowed pain. "But you," she hesitated, fighting tears, "you didn't bow your head. You stood still, even when they tried to break you." For a beat, the world hushed. The woman's smile wasn't wide, but steady, like something rooted deep. "That's the real victory," she whispered back. Her tone was gentle, not triumphant, as if teaching the girl that strength didn't always come in thunder. The student blinked, gripping her books tighter, as though carrying something new, courage that finally belonged to her. Around them, the quiet pressed heavier than laughter ever could. Narration slipped in like a shadow. Justice didn't live in grand speeches or angry roars. It lived in the hush that followed, in the way silence forced hearts to listen. The woman stepped forward, sunlight brushing her face as though the day itself recognized her resolve. Behind her, the girl stood taller, her whisper still hanging in the air. The victory was not loud, not violent. It was a murmur that reshaped the ground beneath them. A whisper. Enough to change everything.